the penthouse door opened as Evelyn whispered, "I have nowhere to go." The rainwater on her worn shoes left small marks across the polished marble floor as she stood beneath the golden hallway lights, holding a torn canvas bag against her chest. Behind the door stood Adrian Valenti, the Korean Mafia boss whose name made powerful men lower their voices and entire rooms fall silent. Yet that night, he did not see a threat. He saw a woman standing at the edge of losing everything. The elevator doors behind her closed with a soft metallic sound, leaving only the quiet hum of the penthouse and the distant city lights flickering through the glass walls. Evelyn Carter had spent the last hour walking through streets that no longer felt like they belonged to her. The small apartment where she had worked, slept, and built a life had been taken away after circumstances she could no longer control. The few belongings she carried fit inside one bag. A spare uniform. A worn photograph. A small silver necklace from her mother. Nothing that could prove she had ever mattered anywhere. She looked down at the marble beneath her feet, then slowly stepped back. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I shouldn't have come here." Adrian's expression remained unreadable. He wore a black suit with no tie, the fabric perfectly pressed under the warm lights of the entryway. The scent of expensive leather and polished wood filled the air. For years, people had entered this penthouse asking for favors, offering deals, or trying to gain his attention. Nobody had ever stood there simply because they had nowhere else to stand. "Who told you to come here?" Adrian asked. Evelyn shook her head. "No one." Her fingers tightened around the handle of her bag. "I just remembered this was the only place where someone once said I would not be left outside." The words landed differently than any business negotiation he had heard before. Adrian looked toward the security panel beside the door, then back at the woman in front of him. The cameras, the locked entrances, the carefully controlled world he had built suddenly felt strangely empty. He stepped aside. "Come in." Evelyn hesitated. The warmth from inside the penthouse touched her face. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen, and the soft glow from the living room lamps reflected against the glass walls overlooking the city. "Why?" she asked. Adrian looked at the empty hallway behind her. "Because standing outside that door is not going to fix anything." She entered slowly. Her eyes moved across the enormous space, the dark wooden floors, the silent artwork on the walls, the view stretching across thousands of apartment windows below. It was a world designed for someone like Adrian. A world where every detail was controlled. But Evelyn noticed something else. A single untouched plate on the dining table. A book left open beside a chair. Signs of a man living in a place too large for one person. Adrian walked toward the kitchen and poured a cup of coffee. He placed it in front of her without a word. Evelyn wrapped both hands around the warm mug. The contrast between the cold rain on her coat and the heat from the ceramic cup made her pause. "You can stay tonight," Adrian said. "Tomorrow, we decide what happens next." Evelyn looked up. "And what do you want in return?" A faint silence filled the room. Adrian had heard that question countless times, but never from someone who had nothing left to offer. "Nothing," he answered. The city lights reflected in the glass behind him as Evelyn lowered her eyes to the coffee in her hands. She did not know that the door she had knocked on belonged to the most feared man in the city. She only knew it was the last door left open. And Adrian did not know that allowing one desperate woman inside his penthouse would become the first decision that changed everything he had built. The first morning inside Adrian Valenti's penthouse began with a sound Evelyn Carter had almost forgotten existed, the quiet rhythm of a place where nobody was asking her to leave. The soft click of the kitchen lights turning on mixed with the gentle hiss of the coffee machine, while the polished stone floor felt cool beneath her bare feet. She stood in the doorway wearing borrowed clothes that were far too expensive for someone who had spent years wearing a simple maid uniform. Adrian had arranged everything without asking questions. A clean sweater. A pair of comfortable shoes. A small room prepared near the guest wing. Nothing more. Nothing less. "There are rules," Adrian said from across the kitchen island. His voice was calm, controlled. The black suit he wore looked untouched by the morning, and the faint scent of cedar from his cologne filled the quiet room. Evelyn looked at him carefully. I knew there would be conditions. Adrian placed a folder on the counter. The first rule is simple. Nobody enters this penthouse without permission. The second rule is that you do not involve yourself in my business. Evelyn glanced at the folder but did not open it. And the third? Adrian paused. You are not here because you owe me anything. The answer surprised her more than any strict rule could have. In Adrian's world, everything had always carried a price. A favor. A debt. A hidden expectation. Yet this time, he had offered a door without asking her to surrender anything. Later that day, Evelyn walked through the penthouse with a small cleaning cart, determined not to become someone who simply waited for kindness. The sunlight reflected against the tall windows, and the sound of the city below blended with the quiet movement of her hands organizing the room. She noticed small details others would have ignored. Dust along the edge of a bookshelf. An empty coffee cup left untouched for hours. A stack of documents placed perfectly but never opened. She cleaned quietly, not because she had been ordered to, but because creating order was the one thing she still knew how to give. When Adrian returned that evening, he stopped near the entrance. The usually cold space felt different. The smell of fresh linen replaced the stale air, and the warm lights reflected across the wooden surfaces. He looked toward Evelyn, who was folding towels in the hallway. You weren't asked to do that. She lowered the towel in her hands. I know. That simple answer stayed with him. Most people around Adrian followed instructions because they feared consequences. Evelyn acted because she believed small acts mattered. Days passed, and the distance between them slowly changed. Adrian continued working from his private office, surrounded by screens and confidential files, while Evelyn remained in her quiet corner of the penthouse. They rarely spoke for long, but each conversation revealed something neither expected. One evening, Adrian found her sitting near the balcony window, repairing the torn strap of her old canvas bag. The city lights reflected on the glass, and the cool night air moved through the open door. Why keep that? He asked. Evelyn looked down at the worn fabric. Because it carried everything I had when I thought I had nothing left. Adrian looked away toward the skyline. For a man who owned buildings, companies, and influence, the answer felt strangely unfamiliar. The next morning, Evelyn received a message from someone she had hoped never to hear from again. Her hand froze above the phone screen. Adrian noticed the change immediately. Who was that? He asked. Evelyn slowly locked the phone and placed it face down. Someone from the life I was trying to escape. Adrian looked toward the closed penthouse doors. For the first time since she arrived, those doors did not feel like protection. They felt like the only thing standing between Evelyn and the past that had finally found her. The first time Evelyn saw Adrian lose control, it was not through anger. It was through silence. The private office doors remained open, the screens on his desk glowing with reports, while the faint sound of rain tapping against the glass walls filled the room. Adrian stood motionless, reading the message that had arrived moments earlier. The name on the screen belonged to someone from Evelyn's past. Someone who had once convinced her that she had nowhere else to turn. Evelyn stood near the doorway holding a tray of coffee, the warm scent mixing with the cold atmosphere of the office. She placed the cup down carefully. You should not involve yourself, she said. Adrian looked at her. Someone is trying to remind you that you are still afraid. Evelyn lowered her eyes. Fear is not the only thing that keeps people quiet. The words made him pause. For years, Adrian had built his world around control. Every problem had a solution. Every enemy had a weakness. But Evelyn was different. She did not need someone to fight her battles. She needed someone to understand why she had survived them. Later that evening, Adrian found Evelyn in the kitchen preparing a simple meal. The soft yellow lights reflected on the counters, and the sound of a knife moving against the cutting board filled the quiet space. The penthouse had always been filled with expensive meals prepared by others, yet the smell of homemade food felt unfamiliar. "You cook?" he asked. Evelyn smiled slightly. "I used to. Before everything changed." Adrian leaned against the doorway. "What changed?" She stopped for a moment, her hand resting on the wooden counter. "People started deciding what I was worth before they ever knew me." The sentence followed him long after he left the room. The next day, Adrian made a decision that surprised everyone around him. He cancelled a meeting, left his usual security behind, and walked into the small neighborhood where Evelyn had once worked. The streets were narrow, the sidewalks worn from years of footsteps, and the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery filled the morning air. He entered the old building where she had spent years cleaning and serving others. The owner recognized him immediately and stood straighter. "Mr. Valenti." Adrian ignored the greeting. His eyes moved around the room. He noticed the broken chair near the corner, the outdated equipment, and the way Evelyn's name had disappeared from the schedule as if she had never been there. When he returned to the penthouse, he did not bring gifts. He brought action. He arranged new opportunities for workers who had been overlooked, but he did it quietly, without attaching his name. When Evelyn found out, she confronted him in the living room. The city lights reflected across the glass windows, and the sound of passing cars rose from far below. "Why did you do that?" she asked. Adrian looked at her. "Because I saw what happened." "No," Evelyn replied. "You saw what happened to me. There are many others still standing outside doors they cannot open." Her words changed the room. Adrian had opened his penthouse door for one person, but Evelyn was showing him a world beyond that single act. That night, he removed the security lock from the guest entrance and replaced it with a simpler system. Evelyn noticed immediately. "You changed the door." Adrian nodded. "A door should protect people, not make them feel trapped." For the first time, Evelyn looked at him not as a powerful man offering shelter, but as someone learning what shelter truly meant. But just as their fragile trust began to grow, a letter appeared beneath the penthouse door. No name. No return address. Only one sentence written across the page: "You saved her from the streets, Adrian. But you don't know who she was running from." The letter remained on Adrian's desk long after the lights of the city disappeared behind the dark glass windows. The paper was thin, almost ordinary, but the words written across it carried a weight that changed the atmosphere of the entire penthouse. Evelyn stood across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had already gone cold. The quiet sound of the clock moving through the room was louder than either of them expected. "Who was I running from?" Adrian asked. Evelyn looked toward the balcony. The curtains moved slightly in the cool night air, and the distant sounds of traffic rose from the streets below. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she placed the old canvas bag on the table. "Someone who believed people like me could never leave." Adrian opened the bag carefully. Inside were simple things: the silver necklace from her mother, the worn photograph, and a small notebook filled with handwritten pages. No secrets about his world. No hidden weapons. Only pieces of a life that had been repeatedly taken apart and rebuilt. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Evelyn looked at him. "Because I did not come here to become another problem you had to solve." The answer struck deeper than any accusation. Adrian had spent his entire life solving problems with power. But Evelyn was reminding him that some wounds were not battles to win. They were experiences people carried. The next morning, Adrian changed the way the penthouse operated. The private staff received new instructions. Nobody was allowed to question Evelyn's presence. Nobody was allowed to treat her as someone beneath them. When one employee made a careless comment about her background, Adrian stopped the conversation immediately. The marble hallway was bright beneath the overhead lights, and the sound of footsteps echoed against the polished floor. "Her worth was never decided by the job she performed," Adrian said. "Remember that." Evelyn heard the words from the doorway. She did not smile. She simply looked at him for a moment, seeing a man who was learning to use his influence differently. Later that afternoon, she found Adrian alone in the office. The scent of coffee filled the room, and the soft glow from the desk lamp reflected against the dark wood shelves. "You did not have to do that," she said. Adrian closed the file in front of him. "Yes, I did." Evelyn shook her head. "You cannot protect everyone." Adrian looked at the city outside. "Maybe not. But I can stop making people feel invisible." For a moment, the powerful man who controlled entire rooms looked nothing like the person the world feared. He looked like someone discovering the cost of everything he had ignored. That evening, Evelyn made dinner for the first time in the penthouse kitchen. The sound of vegetables being chopped mixed with the soft music playing in the background. The warm smell of food filled the room, replacing the cold emptiness that had always surrounded Adrian's home. He watched from the counter as she moved naturally through the space. "You are comfortable here now," he said. Evelyn paused. "I am comfortable because you stopped making me feel like I was a guest who could be removed at any moment." Adrian lowered his eyes. The sentence stayed with him. Before she went to sleep, Evelyn found something waiting outside her room. It was not a gift. It was a key. A simple key to the guest entrance. No restrictions. No locked access. Just trust. She held it in her palm as Adrian approached. "Why give me this?" she asked. He answered quietly, "Because a door should open both ways." But before the moment could settle, Adrian's phone rang. His expression changed as he listened. The color drained from the screen displaying the message. Evelyn noticed immediately. What happened? Adrian looked at her, then at the open door between them. "Someone from your past is coming here." The penthouse suddenly felt different. The place that had once been a refuge was now the place where Evelyn's past was about to arrive. And this time, she would not be standing outside the door alone. Adrian did not sleep after the message arrived. The penthouse remained silent, but the silence had changed. The soft hum of the city below, the faint glow of the hallway lights, and the cold surface of the glass walls made the room feel like it was waiting for something. Evelyn stood near the window holding the small key Adrian had given her, turning it between her fingers. "Who is coming?" she asked. Adrian placed his phone on the table. The screen showed only a name, but the reaction in his eyes said enough. "Someone who believes you still belong to him." The word settled heavily between them. Evelyn slowly placed the key down. "My ex." Adrian did not move. He had heard threats from powerful people before. He had faced men who wanted money, influence, and control. But this was different. This was someone who had once been allowed into Evelyn's life. Someone who knew how to hurt her without raising his voice. The next morning, Adrian changed the security plan of the entire building. Not because he wanted to control Evelyn, but because he finally understood the difference between a locked door and a protected door. The elevators required new access codes. The front entrance received additional staff. The quiet rhythm of the penthouse changed as people moved quickly through the marble halls. Evelyn watched from the kitchen doorway as Adrian gave instructions. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and the warm sunlight reflected across the wooden counters. "You are preparing for a war," she said. Adrian looked back. "No. I am preparing so you do not have to face one alone." Evelyn lowered her eyes. She had heard promises before. Promises that disappeared when things became inconvenient. Later that afternoon, Adrian found her packing a small bag. The sound of clothes folding against fabric filled the bedroom. The afternoon light touched the white walls, and the faint scent of lavender from the room's candles mixed with the cold air from the open window. "Where are you going?" he asked. Evelyn stopped. "Somewhere he cannot find me." Adrian stepped closer but kept his distance. "You came here because you had nowhere else to go." She looked at him. "And I cannot stay forever." The sentence reminded him of the first night she entered his penthouse. A woman standing at his door with nothing except a worn bag and a quiet request for safety. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and placed a document on the table. Evelyn looked down. It was not a contract. It was not an agreement forcing her to remain. It was a legal protection plan giving her control over her own choices, with resources available if she decided to leave. "You are free to walk away," Adrian said. "But you will never again have to run because someone decided you were powerless." Evelyn touched the paper. The edges were smooth beneath her fingers. For the first time, the choice in front of her belonged to her. That evening, the two of them stood in the penthouse entrance. The heavy wooden door, once a symbol of a place she did not belong, now looked different. Adrian unlocked it and stepped aside. "This door was never meant to keep you trapped," he said. "It was meant to remind you that you have somewhere safe to return to." Before Evelyn could answer, the elevator bell echoed through the hallway. The sound was sharp against the quiet room. A man's voice came from behind the elevator doors. "Evelyn, I know you are in there." She froze. Adrian moved beside her, not in front of her. The elevator doors opened slowly, revealing the man from her past standing beneath the bright hallway lights. He looked toward Evelyn, then toward Adrian. His confident expression faded when he realized she was not alone. Adrian did not raise his voice. He simply said, "You are standing at a door that is no longer yours to enter." And for the first time, Evelyn watched someone protect her without asking for anything in return. Adrian did not close the door immediately. He stood beside Evelyn in the quiet entrance hall, the golden lights above them casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. The scent of fresh wood from the heavy doorway mixed with the cold air drifting from the elevator, and every second felt heavier than the last. The man standing outside looked at Evelyn as if he still expected her to step back into the life she had escaped. "You really think hiding behind him changes anything?" he asked. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the edge of her sleeve, but she did not move. Adrian watched her, not the man. "Evelyn," he said softly, "this is your choice." The words mattered more than the protection around her. For years, people had decided things for her. Where she should go. What she should accept. What she should forgive. But now, inside the penthouse that once felt like someone else's world, she was the one standing in control. The man outside stepped forward, but the security system quietly locked the hallway door between them. No shouting. No struggle. Just a simple sound of a mechanism turning, followed by silence. Adrian looked at him through the glass panel. "You do not have permission to enter this home." Evelyn looked at Adrian. "You locked the door." He nodded. "Not to keep you inside." His eyes moved toward the closed entrance. "To make sure the person who hurt you cannot walk in whenever he wants." Later that night, Evelyn sat in the penthouse kitchen while rain tapped against the wide windows. The city lights reflected on the black stone counters, and the warm smell of tea filled the room. Adrian placed a cup in front of her and sat across the table. For once, there were no guards, no business calls, no threats waiting outside. Just two people in a quiet room. "Why are you doing this?" Evelyn asked. Adrian looked at the steam rising from the cup. "Because I know what it looks like when someone loses every place they thought they could belong." She studied him carefully. The powerful man everyone feared was sitting across from her without his usual distance. The next morning, Evelyn made a decision that changed the balance between them. She walked into Adrian's office carrying the documents he had prepared. The room was filled with the scent of leather and coffee, sunlight cutting through the glass walls behind his desk. She placed the papers down. "I want to stay," she said. Adrian looked up, surprised. "Because you feel safe?" She shook her head. "Because for the first time I am choosing somewhere to be." Adrian did not touch the papers. Instead, he pushed them back toward her. "Then stay because you want to. Not because you owe me anything." Evelyn looked at the document, then slowly tore up the temporary agreement that had defined her place in the penthouse. The pieces landed softly on the desk. A small action, but it changed everything. She was no longer a guest waiting for permission. She was someone making her own decision. Days passed, and the tension around the penthouse began to shift. Adrian stopped giving orders about Evelyn's safety and started asking what she needed. Evelyn stopped apologizing every time she entered a room. The distance between them was replaced by quiet moments, a shared coffee in the morning, conversations near the window, and the sound of laughter that had not existed there before. But the peace did not last. One evening, Adrian received a message from his security team. The screen showed a photo of Evelyn's former apartment building. Someone had been watching it. Adrian placed the phone face down before Evelyn could see. But she noticed the change in his expression. "What happened?" she asked. This time, Adrian did not hide the truth. "Your past is trying to reach you again." Evelyn stood beside him, looking at the city below. The glass reflected both of their faces, standing together in the same frame. "Then let it come," she whispered. Adrian turned toward her. She was no longer the woman who arrived at his door with nowhere to go. She was the woman who had chosen to stay. And when Adrian opened the next message, he saw the one thing that would test that choice, a demand that Evelyn leave the penthouse within 48 hours, or the person from her past would reveal a secret that could destroy the life she had just begun to build. Adrian read the message 3 times before placing the phone on the desk. The office remained still, except for the quiet ticking of the wall clock and the faint sound of rain sliding across the glass windows. The threat was simple. 48 hours. Leave the penthouse, or Evelyn's past would be dragged into the light. But this time Adrian did not see a problem to eliminate. He saw a choice Evelyn had the right to make. Evelyn entered the office carrying 2 cups of coffee. The warm scent filled the room, mixing with the cold air from the ventilation system. She noticed the phone on the desk and the way Adrian's hand rested beside it. "You are trying to protect me from something again," she said. Adrian looked at her. "I am trying to make sure you know everything before you decide what happens next." He showed her the message. She read every word without looking away. The room became quiet except for the rain tapping against the windows. "They want me to run," Evelyn whispered. Adrian nodded. "Yes." She placed the phone back on the desk. "And you think I should?" Adrian did not answer immediately. That silence told her more than any command could. The man who controlled companies, people, and entire rooms was waiting for her decision. Not giving it. Waiting for it. That afternoon, Evelyn did something Adrian did not expect. She walked out of the penthouse. Not to leave forever. Not to escape. She simply stepped into the elevator wearing the same coat she had arrived with weeks earlier. The metallic doors reflected her face under the bright white lights. The elevator smelled faintly of polished steel and fresh paint. Adrian followed, but he stopped before entering. "Where are you going?" he asked. Evelyn looked back. "To the place where I was afraid to return." The old apartment building stood several blocks away. The hallway lights flickered above cracked tiles, and the smell of old dust filled the narrow corridor. Evelyn unlocked her former apartment door slowly. Inside, the rooms were empty except for a few forgotten boxes. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faded scent of her old laundry detergent remained like echoes of another life. Adrian stood near the entrance, observing. He did not touch anything. He did not take control. He simply stayed beside her. Evelyn opened a drawer and removed a small notebook. She held it for a moment, then placed it into her bag. "This is why I cannot keep running," she said. Adrian looked at the notebook. "Because of what is inside?" She shook her head. "Because it reminds me that I survived before I met you." The words changed something between them. She was not asking him to save her anymore. She was reminding him that she had strength of her own. When they returned to the penthouse, Adrian made a decision. He gathered his security team and changed the entire plan. No one approaches Evelyn without her permission, he said. No one speaks for her. No one decides for her. The order surprised everyone in the room. The most powerful man there was giving away control instead of taking it. That night, Evelyn stood by the penthouse doors holding the key Adrian had given her. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, and the soft sound of distant traffic rose from below. You could have locked every door and kept me hidden, she said. Adrian looked at the entrance. I could have. But you didn't. He shook his head. Because a safe place is not a prison. Before Evelyn could answer, the elevator alarm sounded. A security notification appeared on Adrian's screen. Someone had entered the building using an old access code. A code connected to Evelyn's past. Adrian looked toward the elevator as the number slowly climbed. Evelyn stepped forward beside him. This time, she did not hide behind him. She stood at the door with him. The elevator stopped. The doors began to open. And on the other side stood the person who had once convinced Evelyn she had nowhere else to go. The elevator doors opened slowly, and the man standing there looked exactly like the memory Evelyn had tried to bury. The hallway lights reflected against the polished floor, the quiet hum of the elevator motor fading into the silence of the penthouse entrance. He wore an expensive coat, held a confident smile, and looked past Adrian as if the years between them meant nothing. Evelyn, he said, you really thought you could disappear? Evelyn remained beside Adrian. She did not step back. The cold air from the elevator brushed against her face, and the faint scent of his familiar cologne moved through the hallway like a reminder of a life she had left behind. Adrian watched her carefully. He did not speak first. This was her moment. The man looked toward Adrian and gave a small laugh. So this is where you ran. A billionaire's penthouse. A powerful man's protection. Adrian's expression remained calm. You are confusing protection with ownership. The man's smile faded slightly. Evelyn looked at him. You came here because you think I still need your permission. Her voice was quiet, but the words stayed in the room. The man took a step closer to the glass doors. You know what happens if people find out why you left. Adrian noticed Evelyn's hand tighten around the key in her palm. But she did not lower her eyes. Instead, she reached into her bag and placed the old notebook from her apartment on the table near the entrance. The leather cover was worn, the edges softened from years of being carried. You came here expecting me to be afraid, she said. But you forgot something. The man stared at her. What? Evelyn looked at Adrian for a second, then back at the person from her past. I am not standing alone anymore. The room became still. Adrian stepped forward, but only after Evelyn moved first. Together, they walked away from the door. The security system quietly closed behind them, leaving the man outside the private entrance. No threats. No argument. Just a clear boundary. Later that evening, Adrian and Evelyn sat in the living room overlooking the city. The warm glow from the fireplace reflected across the glass walls, and the soft crackle of burning wood filled the quiet space. Evelyn opened the notebook on the table. Inside were old notes, unfinished plans, and reminders of the person she had been before someone convinced her she was powerless. I forgot this woman existed, she whispered. Adrian looked at the pages. She was always there. Evelyn closed the notebook and looked toward the penthouse doors. When I first came here, I thought those doors were keeping the world away from me. Adrian leaned back. And now? She touched the key. Now I know they were waiting for me to choose when to open them. The next morning, Adrian made another unexpected move. He invited Evelyn into a meeting with his legal team. The bright conference room smelled of coffee and fresh paper, sunlight stretching across the long wooden table. Everyone expected Adrian to speak for her. Instead, he placed the documents in front of Evelyn. These decisions belong to you. She read through the papers carefully. They were not agreements controlling her life. They were protections giving her independence, financial security, and a future beyond fear. Evelyn signed her name slowly. Not because she had nowhere else to go. Because she finally had somewhere she wanted to stay. That evening, the penthouse doors stood open to the balcony for the first time. The city breeze moved through the room, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and the smell of rain from the streets below. Adrian stood beside Evelyn as she looked over the skyline. "You know," she said, "everyone thinks powerful people build walls to keep others out." Adrian looked at her. "Sometimes they build doors so someone finally has a place to enter." Before she could answer, Adrian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression changed. The message contained one final warning from Evelyn's ex: he was not coming back for her. He was coming to take away the one thing she had finally found, her choice. And this time, Adrian knew the next door that opened would decide everything. Adrian arrived at the penthouse before sunrise, but the city was already awake beneath the glass walls. The first light of morning stretched across the marble floor, and the quiet sound of coffee brewing filled the kitchen. Evelyn stood near the entrance, holding the key he had given her weeks before. It was the same door where she had once whispered that she had nowhere to go. Now she stood there by choice. Adrian placed his phone on the counter. The final message from Evelyn's ex remained open. The demand was clear, but this time Adrian did not reach for control. He reached for Evelyn's hand and placed the phone between them. "What do you want to do?" he asked. The question was simple, but it carried everything that had changed. Evelyn looked at the message, then at the door. The heavy wooden surface reflected the soft morning light, and the faint scent of coffee mixed with the cool air from the hallway. "I spent so long trying to disappear," she said quietly. "I forgot I was allowed to stand somewhere and be seen." Adrian said nothing. He let her choose. Hours later, Evelyn walked into a meeting room with Adrian beside her. The room was filled with the scent of fresh paper and polished wood, sunlight falling across the long table where lawyers and executives waited. Everyone expected Adrian, the Korean Mafia boss known for his influence and power, to speak first. Instead, he stepped back. Evelyn placed the documents on the table herself. They were not a request for protection. They were her statement of independence. Her former relationship, the threats, the fear, and the years of being made to feel small were no longer chains around her. They were proof of the distance she had traveled. "I am not here because I need someone to save me," Evelyn said. "I am here because I finally understand my own worth." The room remained silent. Adrian watched the woman who once arrived at his door carrying a small bag now stand with a steady voice and her own decision. Later that evening, the penthouse doors opened to the balcony. The city wind moved through the room, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and the fresh scent of rain. Evelyn stood beside Adrian, looking at the same skyline she had once watched from behind a locked door. "You know what is strange," she said. "When I first came here, I thought your doors were the thing protecting me." Adrian looked at her. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now I know the person behind the door was what mattered." Adrian looked away for a moment, the man who had built walls around every part of his life finally facing the one thing he could not command: trust. A few weeks later, the penthouse changed. The cold rooms filled with small signs of life. A second coffee cup appeared every morning beside Adrian's. Evelyn's books rested on the shelves. Her footsteps became familiar in the quiet halls. The place was no longer a fortress. It was a home. Adrian never locked the doors to keep Evelyn from leaving. He kept them open so she would always remember she could walk away and still be welcomed back. One evening, Evelyn stood at the entrance holding the key one last time. Adrian approached, expecting nothing. She placed the key into his hand, then closed his fingers around it. "I do not need this to prove I belong here," she said. "Because I chose to stay." The hallway lights glowed softly against the marble walls. Outside, the city continued moving, unaware of the quiet victory inside those doors. Adrian looked at the woman who had once arrived with nothing and now stood with everything she had earned. He had opened his penthouse because she had nowhere else to go, but in the end, she stayed because she had finally found a place where her freedom was respected. And that day, the world remembered that a true home is not the place that keeps someone inside, but the place where they are always free to return.